Neville Goddard summarized a central element of his model in the phrase, "Feel it once and move on." By this, he did not mean producing emotion repeatedly, nor sustaining a mood. He meant that a single, complete assumption of fulfillment is psychologically sufficient. In his view, once the mind has occupied the position of already having, continued inner effort only indicates that the position has not truly been accepted. Feel it refers to entering the state of completion. Once refers to the moment when that state is internally recognized as real. Move on refers to withdrawing attention from the desire as an open problem. The core claim is that repetition is not a sign of strength, but of unresolved identification with lack. When the mind is convinced, it does not keep restating the case to itself. The question Neville leaves implicit is whether such conviction can arise in a single act of assumption, or whether the mind naturally returns to rehearsal because identity has not yet stabilized. For this claim to make sense, a particular assumption about consciousness must be in place. Neville treats consciousness not as a passive recorder of events, but as the organizing field in which experience takes shape. In this framework, what you take yourself to be determines what you notice, what you expect, and what feels possible. Identity is not an abstract label. It is the reference point from which perception and interpretation proceed. Feeling it once means shifting identity from one who wants to one who has. If that shift is genuine, further mental labor is unnecessary because the organizing position has already changed. Continued repetition would imply that the mind is still positioned in the state of wanting and is attempting to talk itself out of it. The unresolved issue is whether identity can truly reorganize in a moment, or whether such reorganization normally requires time to become stable. The psychological mechanism Neville relies on is the concept of state. A state is a stable configuration of expectation, self-definition, and emotional tone. It is not a passing thought, but a background orientation that determines how information is processed. You are asked to notice that when you believe a matter is settled, your attention no longer circles it. When you believe it is unresolved, your attention repeatedly returns to it. Feeling it once means entering a state in which the question is internally closed. The mind then treats the condition as normal rather than pending. From this position, interpretation and response are automatically adjusted. The tension lies in how long the mind must remain in such a state before it registers as the new baseline rather than a temporary simulation. Discipline of attention plays a specific role here. Neville does not define discipline as forcing concentration or suppressing contrary thoughts. He defines it as refusing to reopen a question that has already been settled in assumption. When repetition occurs, it is often because attention keeps returning to the problem as if it were still undecided. Move on means allowing attention to shift away, not because the matter is unimportant, but because it is regarded as complete. You are asked to notice the difference between recalling a concluded decision and revisiting an unresolved one. In the first case, there is no inner argument. In the second, there is continual review. The unresolved problem is whether attention can withdraw naturally once identity has shifted, or whether deliberate control is required to prevent re-engagement. Within Neville's internal logic, causation follows state rather than effort. He does not describe a linear process in which repeated mental actions accumulate power. He describes a correspondence between the position the mind occupies and the pattern of experience that follows. From this standpoint, striving reinforces the state of not yet having, because it continually affirms the existence of a gap between the self and the desired condition. A single assumption of fulfillment, if complete, removes that gap at the level of identity. The mind then interprets events from the standpoint of completion rather than pursuit. The open question is whether this reorganization only affects interpretation, or whether it also alters the sequence of events that become available for interpretation. This way of thinking does not appear in isolation. Across different historical contexts, systems of thought have proposed that inner conviction precedes outer confirmation. Whether framed in philosophical, psychological, or ethical terms, the idea recurs that what is taken as settled internally shapes how reality is experienced and responded to. Neville's contribution is to articulate this pattern in terms of cognitive states, attention, and identification, rather than in devotional or doctrinal language. The continuity suggests that humans have long observed a link between inner certainty and the stabilization of experience. The unresolved issue is whether this reflects a fundamental structure of cognition or a persistent tendency to project inner organization onto external sequences. Perception, in this framework, is always filtered through assumption. You are not encountering events in a neutral field. You are encountering them from within a state that already classifies what is relevant, what is likely, and what is significant. When a condition is assumed as complete, perception no longer scans for evidence of its absence. It organizes around coherence with the assumed position. Moving on, therefore, means that the mind is no longer in a posture of checking. Experience is interpreted through the lens of settled expectation. The tension remains whether this filtering only changes subjective interpretation, or whether it also influences which events come into focus at all. Agency, as Neville defines it, is the capacity to select and inhabit a state, not the capacity to repeatedly assert a desire. Responsibility is located at the level of identity rather than at the level of continuous mental action. You are not asked to maintain effort, but to recognize where you have placed the sense of "this is how things are." Once that placement is made, the model assumes that perception and response will follow automatically. The unresolved issue is whether a single act of inner consent can remain operative without renewal, or whether the mind naturally drifts and requires periodic reorientation. The notion of cognitive stillness brings these elements together. Stillness does not mean the absence of thought. It means the absence of inner negotiation. When a matter is considered closed, the mind is no longer divided between affirmation and doubt. Feel it once and move on describes this closure. The state has been entered, the question has been internally resolved, and attention is free to engage elsewhere. Understanding Neville Goddard's framework in this way does not require acceptance of its claims about external outcomes. It requires seeing the coherence of the model, identity as the organizing center, state as the operative unit, attention as the stabilizing factor, and feeling as the subjective marker of conviction. What remains is the structure of the idea itself, observed, without the need to convert it into belief or dismiss it as error.